Ladies and gents, Casual Gaming Dad here, and I've been really busy lately, especially over the weekend, so I haven't had time to watch this video and react to it, but I wanted to. They've been putting out more content lately on the Diablo YouTube channel. So this is a gameplay guides, and it's talking about building a character, and it's based off of Wudijo, who's a big content creator here on YouTube. So let's check it out.
Hi everyone, my name is Wudijo, I'm a Diablo content creator and I'm here to bring you a core gameplay guide on Diablo 4. This is the first video in the series and we're gonna talk about character customization, skill trees and what makes a build work. Let's get right into it. When you're starting out for the first time in Diablo 4, you might be wondering which class should I play. There are 5 to choose from: the Barbarian, the Necromancer, the Sorcerer, the Druid and the Rogue. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses and their own flavor in how you approach them and how you play them. In the end, it comes down to what you think would suit you best, what kind of fantasy you want to play
Fantasy,
out
play
with your
style,
character, and how you want to customize it later on as you go. As a sorcerer, you'll have access to fire, lightning and cold spells, for example, while as a rogue you can play melee or ranged with bow or daggers. Necromancers bring summons and their death magic. Druids have their own summons, they can transform and have elemental magic, and the Barbarian obviously jumps into the fray to wreak havoc. And each of those classes has their own set of skills that you can play around with and try to customize it to your liking. So in short, choose whatever you want and make it yours. There are many different viable options that you can play. You don't have to stick to one exact build from the start to the end, and you can always adjust things as you go.
It's very true.
That's one
It's
of the
experience
neat
I had.
features of the skill tree that allows you to reassign points on the fly for a gold cost and then assign it to something else, and you can always try to min-max your build a little bit with some different choices and try to figure out what works best for you. As you level up your character, you will unlock more skill points that you can use to spend on your skills or passive abilities, and there's also more and more legendary items, eventually unique items coming in that also change the way you play a character. One example of that could be that you started as a cold sorceress trying to make a frozen orb build, but then you find an item that gives you +1 to your summoned hydras, and suddenly you can have 2 of those hydras, which makes it obviously a very powerful choice. And maybe you want to adjust your build a little bit, unspec one of those skills that you had as a supporting option and get in the hydra, and you can still play your cold build and combine it with this new item that you found to make your own combo. But as always, the devil is in the details and you can't always expect to get the lucky drops. So what makes a build actually work? The most important thing to consider is how are you gonna deal damage? How are you gonna defeat enemies? Because that's what Diablo is all about.
It's all about
you wanna slay
the
those
damage
demons before they slay you. While the game allows you massive freedom and customization, there are definitely some guidelines you want to follow. So number 1 is you should focus on one main ability. At least most builds will have, for example, a core skill like the Frozen Orb, or on the Rogue, maybe Flurry or Barrage, or on the Barbarian, something like Hammer of the Ancients. And this is your main ability that you will use most of the time during your big damage bursts. Usually you also want to go with a basic ability that you get right at the start, at the top of the skill tree. That is just a filler ability that you can use maybe to apply certain buffs or debuffs, and just deal some extra chip damage when you have a downtime or not enough resource. Obviously there are exceptions and you don't have to stick to this concept with a core skill. You can also make, for example, a Conjuration Sorceress that has Hydra and Ice Blades and even Lightning Spear together, and then stick in an ultimate as your last ability and completely skip those core skills if you want. Or you can have a Summoner Necro. You don't really have to rely on your own abilities to deal damage and just have your minions deal damage instead. But the bottom line is that you have very limited skill slots and points to spend on the tree, so that you want to look for synergies with the few points that you have. You want to try to boost one
synergies and gear.
2 or 3 that
gear's going to matter a lot.
Work together, then stick in maybe other abilities that are utility choices.
I think one of the really fun things I like to do when I'm playing is when you find that item or like a legendary power or an aspect that gives you some freedom, right, and allows you to try something new out, or it makes a build available to you. So for example, I found a legendary ring that had a power for the druid that enabled the tornadoes I threw out to seek out enemies. From there, it really opened up the elemental druid. I felt for melee. I really liked the lightning, the storm as well. It just felt so good. But the tornadoes, they were powerful, but it was difficult to aim them, and it was easy to miss. Their AI wasn't very good, so that legendary power, if you really like the tornadoes, for example, you like the wind druid, it's kind of necessary in a way, and when you find it, then it opens it up for you. So
Those defensive choices, mobility, that help you out in those downtimes and act as a cooldown or as an extra.
And just to be clear, I think that's very. I know some people might say, "Oh, that really sucks that I can't use this skill until I find it." You can, especially when you're leveling. It's fine, but I personally like that there are items that open up, really open builds up that way. It makes it really exciting to find. It just does.
Tool to deal with enemies. One example for this is Rogue with the dash skill. This is really a signature ability. It allows you to move around the battlefield really quickly, reposition for better shots with your bow, or get in and out of the fight with a melee rogue. And this is really something that works in most builds. You can always stick it in. It feels good to use. You're faster while moving, while traveling, and you have a combat application for it. And then you complement the setup with maybe an ultimate ability like the Shadow Clone or the Smoke Grenade so that you can disable enemies and deal with them safely, while also having something like a Shadow Imbuement for extra AoE damage that you can activate to boost your core skill that you use as your main ability. And as I mentioned, there are these various customization options, and you can always adjust some extra skill slots the way you want it. Once you have unlocked 6 different skills and you have found the setup that you like, you can start spending more points into, for example, your core ability to boost its damage, or some of the utility choices to reduce the cooldown or increase their effects in other ways, or even go for some of those passive abilities that you can find all over the skill tree.
I love the way the druid bear looks.
Or defensive buff, or some conditional effect that helps you out with your build, and you can also try to use those to min-max your character further. Similar to a lot of the legendary items that you may find in the game, there are a lot of conditional effects that activate, for example, against crowd control targets, against vulnerable targets, against frozen targets, and these kind of things. And you always want to try to figure out how to fit them into your build. When you find this one item that gives you this massive damage bonus against stunned enemies, you might want to think about, do you want to use that? Do you want to maybe try to fit in a stun ability that can activate this buff to get a bigger burst out when you need it against an elite, for example? Or there's other items that boost your damage while you have a barrier, and maybe you want to try to figure out how to stick a barrier effect into your setup. But obviously, while the skill tree makes the core of your setup, it's not everything, and later on you're gonna unlock even more systems. So as you go, you're gonna find more of these legendary items, and you also get the Paragon points later with the Paragon boards that allow you to customize your setup even further to push your build in one or the other direction. And obviously, in addition to the skills, let's not forget about the equipment of your character. This is the stuff that you're hunting for, the loot that you can find in the world. This is
The
at
loot,
heart of
baby.
the Diablo game, and it is very important here as well. Especially your weapon is your most important equipment slot. You always want to make sure that your weapon is upgraded as much as possible, the highest item power possible, and gives you the highest damage stats. Because this is what is the base value for all the other calculations of how you deal damage later on with all of your skills and additional effects. So always keep a special eye on your weapon, and whenever you find an upgrade, try to fit it into your build, because this is the most important slot. You want to make sure that all of your equipment is good, of course, but the weapon is the core. This is how you deal damage. The loot that you can find from monsters obviously improves with their level. So as you go, you're gonna find better and better loot, and you want to keep an eye out for all of your equipment slots. But in some cases, it can definitely be worth holding on to what you have for a while if it has a really good combination of stats, or for example a really good legendary ability. You should always take a closer look and not just follow the green numbers that show on the item itself.
Yeah,
A lot
that
of
would be
different stuff
really
in the world,
boring.
and not all of them apply to every build. Sometimes you get skill bonuses that you don't use, and sometimes you get damage bonuses that don't
Yep.
work with your main ability.
Yeah, like I remember in my druid, I found a couple items that had like plus to all summoning skills, and I tried the summoning skills out and whatnot, but I wasn't really using them. So I mean, those items weren't that useful in that sense.
And these items are not really useful. And some of these stats you can find on items are also very rare or very impactful for your current setup, or just universally useful. One example of that is movement speed on the boots. You should always try to have movement speed there, because you don't really get that much from other sources, and going fast around the world helps you both in speeding up your progression and in combat to dodge enemy abilities, for example. And lastly, we should not forget that you can also alter your items to make them more powerful. You can upgrade them at the blacksmith, you can socket gems or add sockets even at the jeweler, and most importantly, you can use the occultist to add or move legendary powers around. So you always want to try to use the occultist and imprinting of legendaries to have the best combination of legendary powers for your current setup, so that you can benefit from the strongest ones the most. But one thing to keep in mind is that at least in the early game, you're also going to replace your items rather frequently, because you get levels quickly, you move to higher monster levels quickly, and find better items a lot more often than later on when the progression slows down. And as I highlighted earlier, the damage output of your weapon is crucial to your character's overall attack power rating and your damage output. So you usually want to avoid putting legendary affixes on your weapon if they're really important for your setup, and instead try to put them on other items, at least in the early game while you're leveling up and replacing your weapons frequently. So to sum it up, play the character that you want and try to find your own way with it. Usually you want to stick to one main ability and maybe support it with other utility or defensive choices, or some secondary damage abilities that you can use on the side.
Yeah.
Or just play around the RNG of the loot that you find. If you have some really powerful legendary effects, you might want to use those instead, and maybe adjust your setup a little bit to make them work and fit them in.
I love the way they have the
Items,
burning
first of all,
work in
look
this
for
game.
strong legendary effects that can boost your damage for certain skills, or look for the right stats that synergize with your current setup. And last but not least, always make sure to upgrade your items, especially your weapon, because this is at the heart of your damage.
I think early
output.
on, yeah, you
If
should.
you follow
It's
these
very
guidelines,
important.
you will
I
have
mean,
plenty
later
of
too,
success
but
with pretty
yeah.
much any character and
It's
build
more
you choose.
impactful when you're leveling.
Obviously, some of them might turn out stronger or weaker than others, but that's also the fun part of it. The discovery, the experimentation of what works the best, and also what works the best for your playstyle. I really hope you enjoyed this guide.
What
and I
works
wish
the
you
best
good
for your
luck with these
playstyle?
first characters in Diablo 4. If you're interested in any more of my content, I do have my own Twitch and YouTube channels that you can come check out. And other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in Sanctuary.
For sure. So I think, he made some really good points, and I would agree that just focusing more on, especially the leveling process, right? When you're first starting out, when I played in the open beta, it was a little bit overwhelming. Not like PoE, like overwhelming. I didn't feel like I couldn't progress if I didn't follow a build guide, which I like. I don't want it to be like that difficult. So I was just trying things out, and it was really easy to respec early on. I know there are concerns about late game and how much it'll cost and whatnot. Yeah, but that's late game, and I feel like by then you should probably have figured out a play style and whatnot that suits you, and so I don't think it'll be as big of an issue, but we'll see, and if you got to make a new character, if it makes more sense to make a new character, then make a new character. It's not a big deal. God, I can't tell you how many thousands of hours I put in Diablo 2 and 3, making new characters and whatnot, so it's really not a big issue, even for a casual like me. So sounds pretty good. I think it makes sense to just go with your playstyle, I think, especially early on. I want to take a quick look at the short because they talk about Nightmare Dungeons. I did see that they posted that today. I didn't see it.
Nightmare Dungeons are going to give the players the opportunity to experience a dungeon that they might have already experienced in their
which we know they talked about this into the end game.
past playthroughs. They'll enter the dungeon with a found sigil that alters the playstyle and the intensity of the dungeon. They're more difficult, and
I definitely like the playstyle change more than difficulty. Yeah, sure. Difficulty, I guess, but
they have additional objectives, and then they also have affixes, which add a degree of difficulty for you and your group to work through.
One of my favorite affixes that you can find in Nightmare Dungeons is actually called Hellgate. Occasionally, these portals will open up throughout the area that will just pour out different monsters that aren't native to that region for you to also be dealing with while you're trying to handle everything else inside the dungeon. There's over 120 dungeons to play through and find in Diablo 4, and any one of them can become a nightmare dungeon by finding a nightmare sigil and then using it to activate the nightmare version of that dungeon space.
It's going to add a little bit of a twist of flavor.
I think it's really cool. I think 120 dungeons sounds pretty adequate for release. I believe they'll add more, and I believe that there's going to be plenty for you to choose from, and you can target maybe certain types of items you're looking for in said dungeons, because you'll know that, you know, what aspects are available. You'll know what types of monsters are in there, and you know that, you know, certain monsters have a higher chance to drop certain types of things. We're going to figure that out. So I do like that. I do. Anyways, thanks for joining me. I got some more Diablo content coming out here pretty soon. Some Diablo 2 ones I'm pretty excited to share about. A build that I recently tried that I'm just having such a blast with, and it's my first time being able to do it because I did build up enough wealth to do so. So stay tuned for more of those, and I'll see you next time. And I'll see you soon at Sanctuary. Can't wait. All right, bye.